Hi.
Good afternoon. Welcome to Otterbein United Methodist Church. We're so happy to see you this afternoon, and thank you for coming out for our Advent lecture series. We are so delighted today to have Curtis Nolley with us to share on Handel's Messiah. Most of you I see are a lot of Choral Society people and people from the area that have known Curtis for a long time, so he does not need much introduction, but I did want to say a few words about him. Curtis is a graduate of Bridgewater College, and he retired from being a full-time music educator after 43 years of teaching at the elementary, secondary, and college levels. And most recently, he served a 2-year visiting professor of choral music at Bridgewater College. So that was fun for him to be back at his alma mater. This is his 22nd year of directing the Shenandoah Valley Choral Society, and he is also the choral director at Bridgewater Church of the Brethren. So we thank him so much for being here today, and I'll turn it over to him.
Thank you, Cindy. Thank you. Appreciate it. It's so good to see you all today. I'm glad to share what I'm calling perspectives. This is personal perspectives, some historical perspectives, and maybe some perspectives on why the Messiah has such incredible staying power. And so I thought I'd share a few about my personal experience with the Messiah over the years, and some other things too. But I do want to thank Sandy for the invitation to be here today. I feel like I'm at home. For many years I was minister of music at First Church of Brethren just across the street on Dogwood Avenue, and I was able to share some choral things when Nancy Hackett was here, who I consider a mentor of mine. And so I'm glad to be back in a place that feels kind of like home. I'm going to start with the first chorus of the Messiah. So we'll just start with listening, do a little bit of listening, and we'll take it from there. So the glory of the Messiah was revealed to me probably when I went to Bridgewater College. I did not sing the Messiah or really know much about it through my high school experience. As a matter of fact, I didn't even sing in choir high school or elementary school until I was at Bridgewater College. I did study voice, but Bridgewater College was my introduction to choral music outside of what little bit I had at Stanton Church of the Brethren while I was there. As you know, many institutions do the Messiah on a regular basis. It's visited perennially, and I have had the great opportunity to kind of experience the Messiah from every angle, as a chorister, as a soloist, and as a director over the past 43 years. And it's been a very interesting journey. At Bridgewater College, I sang for the first time in the Messiah my freshman year at Bridgewater. That was the year it was coming up to be done. And I was studying voice at Bridgewater, and I did know the tenor solos, but I was not selected to do the tenor solos because a senior sang the solos. So I sang in the choir and then sang it in a chorus many other times on the direction of many conductors, including Ken Knopfsinger with the Shenandoah Valley Choral Society and others. And I've always loved singing the Messiah. It's an incredibly satisfying piece to sing, and it's a very accessible piece to sing. And so there's another reason why you seem to sing why it comes around often. I never get tired of singing it. Sometimes a director can get tired of directing it because there are so many wonderful pieces to do. I don't know how many times I've had the opportunity to direct it. With the Choral Society, it's been 5 times. It's been interesting. For the most part, the Messiah is done at Christmas. You all, most of you have experienced mostly at Christmas time. Although it was not written to be done at that time. It was written as a piece to be done before, in the Easter season. But generally speaking, it is done, part 1 is done more often than in any of the others. I had an interesting call the other day from somebody who said, well, you're doing part 1. What do you mean? What does that mean? Now, a lot of people don't know that it's written in 3 parts. The Messiah is written, the birth, prophecy and birth is part 1, passion and suffering of Christ is part 2, and of course, resurrection is part 3. You always hear the Hallelujah chorus, but that is not a part of the Christmas portion of the Messiah. The only reason you hear that is because it's an audience demand. If you do the Messiah, you do the Hallelujah chorus, right? Hallelujah. So that's just part and parcel of what happens when the Messiah is done. But part 2 and 3 can be done on their own. As a matter of fact, whether it was because I was naive or I thought I had a great idea, I'm not sure. But the first year that I worked with the Messiah in 1999, Gretchen Welch, who was the former director, had done part 1 the Christmas before. And I thought, well, I'll just do part 2 and 3, just because it should be finished now, shouldn't it? Now, I did not get any pushback on that, and people were very receptive. And frankly, I think that's maybe not a bad idea, although I have actually not ever heard the Messiah done only as part 2 and 3 before or since. So I think I must have been an innovator, but nobody bought into that. But anyway, so that was my first time, and we've done it five times, portions of it, and 1 time I've done all 3 sections. It's it's much more unusual to hear 3 sections. The Messiah is about 3 hours long with 1 intermission, and sometimes people take 2. It's a big work. So and it's demanding vocally to sing that long. Although it allows the singers and choristers to find some rest. Part of the staying power, and I'm getting out of my thing, but part of the staying power of the Messiah is that it's so approachable, listenable.
And there's a very wonderful balance between the orchestral parts and the soloists and the choruses. And so it allows the singers and the listeners and singers to be engaged all the time. Because of that balance, you don't have a lot of the same thing happening. There's a lot of variety in the work, and so Handel did a wonderful job of keeping the interest of the listeners and the singers all throughout the piece with the way he's placed the soloists. Now, the Messiah is a little bit different than Handel's other works, other oratorios. In the Messiah, and the other oratorios, whether it's Israel and Egypt or Jephthah or so many of the others, the Messiah does not include characters. There is no character that's represented by any of the vocal parts that you see in the others. You have each of the soloists and the chorus take turns relaying this story of Christ's arc in his life and in our experiences, Christian experience, his birth, the prophecy from Isaiah, and then of course through the passion and the resurrection. And so you've got this wide story that's told, but each of the groups that sing, whether it's the choir or whether it's the soloist, just move the story forward without taking on a first-person character. And so that's a little unusual. This is one of the only oratorios where that happens. And that's also another reason why the Messiah has such staying power, is that it engages not just the singers but the listeners personally. And if you go through and look at the Messiah, there's a lot of the pronouns that are used engage us personally. And it also allows the Messiah to have kind of a universal appeal, not just Christian, but universal. For unto us a child is born. By his stripes we are healed. And so over and over and over, you're engaged personally in this story. And so I think this is another reason why the Messiah has the meaning and the draw that it has. It's also, in the big picture, a pretty accessible work. Most pretty good average choirs can sing the Messiah. Okay, some of the other Baroque pieces are much more contrapuntal. And so it's a more difficult, for instance, Bach, and we'll talk a little more about Bach and some historical perspectives later. Bach is a lot more demanding with the contrapuntal writing that he does. Handel, indeed, has wonderful contrapuntal writing, but it's not nearly as complex. Individual voices do it much, and oftentimes you have duets, perhaps, but it's not nearly as complex as some of the other Baroque writing. So that is another reason why I think that in terms of musically speaking, it allows the piece to be done more often and engage the singers in that way. My experience as a soloist, I have the Messiah is long. And I've had many experiences with many groups. I will not forget the time I took my students at Turner Ashby High School on a trip to Washington, D.C., and this is in the spring, and the Kennedy Center was producing the Messiah in full, without cuts. Even when I did the Messiah with the Choral Society, I made judicious cuts. So even though Handel was fabulous, not all of his choruses, in my opinion, are great fun to sing. So I probably cut about 20 minutes at least from pieces, mostly in the second and third parts. Those where the cuts are done. But the performance at the Kennedy Center was in total. So there were a couple of interesting things. I told the students we were going to, of course, it was the last thing on our weekend trip. We started on a Thursday, and Sunday afternoon at 3 o'clock is when the performance was. So you can imagine what happened between Thursday and Sunday with the students. You know, concerts and all the obligatory museums and everything else, walking around. So by the time they got to the Kennedy Center at 3 o'clock, they were pretty tired. And then we had 3 hours of the Messiah to listen to. Well, the first thing that was interesting is that they didn't know about countertenors at that time. I maybe had talked about it. But the role of the alto at that particular concert was done by a countertenor. And I looked over my sea of students in the choir. I had a pretty good choir at that time. Listened to this first time that the countertenor sang, and their eyes just got this big, that they heard a male singing the alto part. And that was great fun. And then in the third part, the other scene that I will not forget, and thankfully we were not in the orchestra at the front, but we were in the nosebleed section in the back, is that I looked out about 2 hours and 50 minutes into the performance, and virtually every student was fast asleep. There was not one student that was still awake at 3 minutes and 45 seconds into the performance. So, if you're going to do the Messiah with students in total, you do it at the beginning of your trip, not at the end. But that was great fun, and I have had many. It's been so much fun to do the Messiah. But I will say, as I mentioned before, I have done the Messiah probably with the Choral Society 5 times. I can't tell you how many times I've done the Every Valley. And one piece, of course, I need to say I really appreciate Handel in that he allowed the tenor to have the first voice in the Messiah. I'm a tenor, and so I think that was a good idea. But in 2017, when I did the Messiah for the 4th time with the Choral Society, I said, this is the last time I'll do the Messiah, I think, with the Choral Society. And of course, as you know, you never should say never. And we had the pandemic. And I was debating. I had this piece that's an English composer that I've been looking at for 3 years. And I was so close to pushing the order button for the orchestral parts that had to come from wherever. But we were singing last year, and some of you may have come to our concert with the Mozart Requiem and then the Rutter Magnificat at Christmas, both of which are large works that need fairly large forces. We sang them both with 60 singers. And the Choral Society is a really fabulous group. I'm blessed to have great singers that want to sing as a part of the Choral Society in this area. So even though this is a volunteer group, by the way, I do have people ask regularly how do they audition for the group after a concert, and of course it's never been auditioned. And we still can sing these fabulous works. I was just debating whether to push the button and order this piece that didn't have a familiar title. And I knew that I needed to bring in and, kind of encourage people to come after that pandemic year. We sang with masks on last season and et cetera. So I was just sitting there kind of thinking about this out loud, and my lovely wife, who gets to listen to all of my music as I try to think about what I'm going to do for the next season or two, said, well, why don't you just do the Messiah again? And I took a deep breath, and I said, okay, well, let's see how long ago has it been done. So it was 2017. That's about 4 or 5 years ago, so that's typically when the Choral Society would do it. And I took a deep breath and said, you know what? I think we're going to give that a try. And, of course, we ended up with about 110 singers. People come out for the Messiah. Our largest choirs at the Choral Society have always been when they've sung for the choir. The largest one was 130 about 15 years ago. We seated. And our largest audiences are for the Messiah. So people simply love the Messiah. I'd like to read this little quote about the Messiah that I read that I thought was very good. It's almost, and I think I actually had this in the program, the Messiah is almost a perfect balance of instrumental, choral, and solo parts. It keeps the attention with its variety, its memorable melodies. It involves a personal element. We us, my. Invitational, that's the invitational message that keeps the message universal. And I said again, as I said earlier, it's generally accessible to most choir. And it's very flexible in its opportunities to be performed. Not all large works are. You can perform the Messiah on the piano with an organ, with a small orchestra. Our orchestra is going to have about four firsts, 4 seconds, 2 violas, a cello, and a bass, along with a harpsichord. It's not a large ensemble, so it can be done in a variety of ways. It's been orchestrated by many composers. Mozart was the first one to re-orchestrate it. He did it with much intrepidation because he didn't feel he was up to the task, but he did it. That's what some other composers view Handel's work. So for those many, many reasons, you know, it's just a piece that seems to really hang in there. Now, I'd be very happy for any of you all, if you have special observations about any performances you'd have had either as a listener or singer of the Messiah. I'd be very happy for you to share those, because, you know, it has really meant a lot to me to have these opportunities over the years to be a part of the Messiah. So I'm gonna move to a kind of a different topic here, and I'd like to talk a little bit about the historical perspective of the Messiah and when it was written, and maybe some things related to the differences between the way Handel's music and Bach's music kind of work together during the same time. But before we do that, I'm going to play a little another piece. While you're listening to this piece, I'd like for you to listen to a couple things. We're going to listen to "For Unto Us a Child is Born," and I'd like for you to listen to, in particular, if I can find it here, sure. Yes. So when you're listening to "For Unto Us a Child is Born," again, you have this personal connection. When you listen to the choir sing it, part of the universal message that comes from this, and I talk about this with the choir, is that, you know, the choir, the contrapuntal entrances and the statement of "For unto us" come from different voices at different times. It's almost as if this is an invitation for people everywhere, universally, to be a part of this experience. The basses sing it, or the sopranos, "For unto us a child is born." Tenors sing it, basses sing it. They all do it separately, as if it's coming from different areas. But then all of a sudden, what brings it together is "Wonderful Counselor, Almighty God, the Everlasting Father, the Prince of Peace." You have the imitative sections which create an invitation and involve us personally, whoever you are, wherever you are, male, female, wherever. And then at the end, it comes together. So you have these staggered entrances, and all of a sudden it all comes together in "Wonderful Counselor, Almighty God." And then it breaks off again, it makes the statements again. It's just really amazing and engaging, and people they don't know this technically, but somewhere in their souls as they're listening to this, it connects. But as I'm preparing the choir, I think it is important as they, you know, when they do this, to understand how this can create connections. And then it allows not only the singers to engage even more personally, but the listeners as well. "For unto us." I'm sorry? A little more volume. Yeah.
shall be upon his shoulder, and his name shall be called Wonderful Counselor, the mighty God, the everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Unto us a child is born, unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given, unto us a son is given, unto us a son is given. The government shall be upon his shoulder. The government shall be upon his shoulder, and his name shall be called Wonderful Counselor, the mighty God, the everlasting Father, the Prince of Peace, the everlasting Father, the Prince of Peace.
The curse of a choral director is always listening to the articulation, phrasing, and the way people handle. This is a very good recording of this, I believe. This is done by a Canadian called Telemusic in Canada, and this is a rendition that they have. You can find this on YouTube. Is where this is from. The thing that's really so much fun to listen to with Handel's writing, and if you were listening carefully, he makes this statement at the beginning, "For unto us a child is born," and everybody gets to do it almost on their own, by themselves, basses, altos, sopranos, tenors, altos, and basses. But as you go through the piece, each of the pieces, and this happens in all of the music, there's urgency that is created as you work your way through the piece. The statement of the melodies come up closer and closer together as you get towards the end. Not only that, you have voices that were not singing together before, but at the end, doing the melisma together against the other melodies. And so it's really quite interesting to see the excitement and to kind of see how Handel builds the excitement for each of his pieces. And there's somewhat of a formula that he has. So listen carefully. You'll see how these melodies and rhythmic things that he uses are spare at the beginning of a piece. But then as he goes through the pieces, they get closer and closer together, and there's more urgency about the presentation and the message. And that just draws people in. It just engages the listener and the singers in all of his works. And it's just incredibly exciting to see these things. The melismas are always the challenge for choirs. The melismas that you hear, "For unto us a child is born," it's a declaration. The important message, of course, melismas always happen on important texts, born. But under that is the continuing message, which I think sometimes is left out. People focus on the melismas, but not on the "Unto us a son is given, unto us." That happens every time you hear, "For unto us a child is born, unto us a son is given, unto us." So they finish the phrase. It's really ingenious. Christ is born, unto us a son is given, underneath those melismas. So there's so many layers that are involved. And one thing that I've asked my singers this year is to think less about the melismas. Have to take. It's important to get them done as well as we can technically, but to make sure if you are singing against the melisma, which is really decorative, is to make sure the message comes through. Unto us a son is given. So that's something, every time I do the Messiah, I try to find something that can make it a little more fresh. Not just for me, but for the choir as well. And so we work at that, because I think that's important. When you do a piece this often, there has to be something that makes it fresh and new. So with that, I'd like to talk a little bit about the history and kind of give some historical perspective about the piece. Handel's dates: he was born in 1685 and died in 1685 to 1750. Sorry. Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you. So Handel was born in 1685 and he died in 1759. So Handel's dates, interestingly, if you look into any music history book, for those of you who've done any music history, the dates for the Baroque period, during which this is the time that the Messiah was written and when wrote, and obviously Handel wrote in that style. The date of the Baroques often use Bach's date, 1685 to 1750. They call that's the Baroque period. And so they use Bach's date to outline that stylistic period. Bach and Handel were born in the same year. In the same year. Very interesting. Handel lived another extra 9 years than Bach did. They were both born in Germany. For the most part, Handel is considered an English composer. He's buried in Westminster Abbey, and he was buried with honors. They claim him as English, but he was originally born in Germany, as of course was Bach. The difference between Bach and Handel was Bach and his musical experience, music as a profession, was very parochial. He never left a very small area of Germany. And while Bach's music was in that area, is very well known, he really kind of maintained a kind of a profile that was not extravagant or, he didn't care that people knew what he wrote. He was only writing for the church. He wasn't writing for himself. And he said that, this is for the church. It's for the glory of God. That's it. And so he wrote it. It was very purposeful. It was for the church. He wrote cantatas. So it was for a very practically for the church. And so his music was not well known. He did not travel outside of a small area of Germany. Handel, however, took a job with the George of Saxony, and as you may well be aware, in that period, royalty was connected all throughout monarchies and in Europe. And George of Saxony ended up being George I of England. And it so happened that as a young composer, Handel was working with who was to become King George at that time and just came with him to England, never left, and became a naturalized citizen of England. Now, in contrast to Handel, to Bach, Handel was very cosmopolitan. He studied in Germany. He finished his music education in Italy and was very enamored with the Italian style of operas and other things. And so he utilized and was willing to utilize stylistic things of his musical styles in his music from lots of different areas. He traveled extensively. His music, while much of it was religious, because he was working with royalty, the king, so much of his music was written for celebrations. I mean, his coronation anthem is still sung at all the coronations. It just was, okay, with the new king. And so fireworks music, water music suites, those were all produced as celebratory pieces commissioned by the king and royalty. So he was quite well known when he died. His funeral was attended by thousands. People were standing out in the street. And conveniently, in his will, he left quite a bit of money for a very nice monument to himself, which is in Westminster Abbey. And we saw that this summer when we were able to visit. But he was very well known. Bach's music probably wasn't discovered to the masses 100 years until after he died. But Handel's was very, very well known. Now, Handel wrote, probably his scope of composition was larger than Bach's in some ways. He wrote operas, mostly in the Italian style, and that really kind of got him in trouble in some ways and he underwrote much of this. Handel was very well-to-do. And so about 1940, he had just, in 1740, he had just finished writing a whole group of an Italian opera that just was not very well received. People were, their interests and their stylistic interests in terms of music were changing. And he didn't quite get that message. And so he produced a couple of operas that were very poorly received, and he did not do well. So he was I'm not so sure we could say he was broke, but he was headed that direction. And he needed to find an outlet for a new piece of music that was not going to, be in that same vein. So at this time, he received a libretto from Jennens, Michael. Is it David? Michael Jennens. What was his first name? The Messiah text. And he was invited to Dublin, Ireland, to perform this for the first time. Now, there was some question about why, when he's in London, why wouldn't you do something like this new work in London, where he could get more recognition? Well, some think that he felt like he didn't want to. This was fairly new. The stylistic presentation of the Messiah was just different enough and new enough that I think historians think he was a little concerned about another failure. And so he wanted to go someplace where if it flopped, it wasn't going to make quite as much of a splash as a flop. So he went to Dublin, Ireland, which was a small town. So he tried to put this thing together, and he wrote the music for the Messiah in about 24 days, which is it sounds like an extraordinary feat for a 3-hour piece of music. But apparently, Handel was an expeditious writer. He wrote very quickly. He didn't sleep much, and he didn't apparently make many mistakes. And so he wrote it very quickly, and it was pretty much done. So they presented this in Dublin, and it was an incredibly tremendous success. As a matter of fact, just reading some interesting little tidbits about the performance in Dublin, Ireland in 1741 is that the tickets sold out immediately for this piece. And so they requested that the women come to the concert without any hoops so they could accommodate another couple 100 people, because they took up a lot of space. And apparently that started a trend. So formal concerts were, you attended them if you were a woman without hoops anymore. I'm sure they were all glad about that. I don't know. I thought that was kind of an interesting thing. But it was, and the first performance was a benefit for an orphanage, and it was incredibly successful. As a matter of fact, I understand that Handel was very benevolent. He gave away a lot of money in his lifetime, and many of the performances of the Messiah were for charitable causes. So he did this performance, I think, twice with a group of 30 singers and 30 in the orchestra. That was it. So we have kind of moved into this sensibility that the Messiah has to be done with a cast of thousands. But it was never really, I don't know that he really ever meant for it to be done with a group as big as the Choral Society right now. And as a matter of fact, I understand that he had some challenges in Dublin finding able musicians to do it. But obviously it worked out. A year later, he did the Messiah in London to mixed reviews. There were some who felt like the subject matter was perhaps a little the life, the trajectory of the life of Christ was a little too religious for the concert hall, and this was never meant to be done in a church. It's just a concert piece, and so there was some pushback from the religious community about doing the Messiah, but just the mere fact that it was so successful kind of moved that out of the way, and it continued to be done. I understand that Handel directed the Messiah, I think I remember a number of about 40 times in the rest of his life. And he lived a good while longer after he wrote the Messiah. And you might, some interesting things, of course, you know that during the Hallelujah chorus there's a tradition of standing. And the story is that King George was so moved. This is the second, by the way, not the first, because he wrote, this is the next king, was so moved by the Hallelujah chorus that he felt like he had to stand. That's the reverent version. The irreverent version is that 2 hours and a half into the concert, it was nature called. When the king stood, everybody stood. So now, I don't believe that's the case, but I've heard that. So now you'll never forget that one, right? Sorry about that. So yeah, I mean, it was a great success for Handel, and he ended up being quite successful in his lifetime. He died, what in today's standards would be a millionaire. I mean, I understand he had like $40,000 pounds in the bank, and by our standards, that's, a millionaire. So he was quite wealthy when he died. And the Messiah, it continued to allow his profile to endure the rest of his life, really, along with so many of his other fabulous works. I've been very lucky in the Choral Society. We did a Handel Fest a number of years ago, which was one of my favorite things to do. And we did the water music suites in total with John Barr playing the organ and some others. It was great fun to do that. Handel's reputation and the way he was viewed by other composers is really kind of interesting. I was curious to know what other composers thought of Handel's work. And so I found that Mozart, who did an updated orchestral version of the Messiah, and this was his quote from Mozart, "Handel knows better than any of us what it will take to make an effect." And I do agree with that. He knows how to make an effect. You can see that in all of his pieces. When he chooses, he strikes us like a thunderbolt. That's Mozart. Beethoven agreed, stating, "Handel was the greatest composer that ever lived." This is from Beethoven. "I would uncover my head and kneel before his tomb." Bach did know Handel. And Bach said that he had heard his music, although they never met. He said, Handel, I thought this was interesting, "Handel's the only person I would wish to see before I die, and the only person I would wish to be were I not Bach." I thought that was pretty good. So even though Bach kept a low profile, he did have a fairly substantial ego. Now, for all of you Methodists here, I've got a good one. I just could not believe it was too good. So apparently, John Wesley was at the premiere of the Messiah, and so in his diary, in his journal, he wrote about this experience, and he says, "There were some parts of the Messiah that were affecting. But I doubt that it has much staying power." So fortunately, John, his work in allowing the church to Continue was certainly good, but Messiah, yeah, he didn't get that one quite right. But I thought that was interesting, and I thought it was interesting that he was actually there at that performance, which I think that's accurate. So that's about all I have really today. It's just the Messiah continues for me to be a very special piece in the experiences that I've had chorally. It's the piece that I've done more than any other choral piece. There's no doubt about it. I have done fortunate enough to sing the Every Valley and Comfort Ye dozens and dozens of times, and it's always great fun to have a chance to do that one, and Thou Shalt Break Them, which is one of my favorite tenor arias. If you have a chance to listen to and haven't heard, that happens in the section 3. It's just a very, very powerful tenor solo, and it's great fun to sing. So take a chance to listen to it. And if you have a chance to come to our performance of the Messiah on the 16th or the 18th, I'd be grateful to have your presence there, as with the choir. They have been working extremely hard on this particular piece. And we're not just doing the Messiah, we are doing part 1 and the Hallelujah Chorus, by the way. And we have a wonderful set of carols in the second half that are just delightful, that you will enjoy. And contemporary and traditional carol settings, along with a world premiere of a carol setting done by Dr. John Barr, a local composer and organist, of Sea Amid the Winter Snows. It's just a beautiful setting, and so we're very excited to come. I would be very happy for anybody to ask any questions. I have no guarantees that I'll be able to answer them, but if you have any questions, please feel free to ask. Or if you have something to share about an experience you've had in singing the Messiah or being a part of that, I'd be real happy to hear those.
Do you think his motivation for writing it was more religious or secular or commercial? Was he trying to hit a home run?
I would say yes to all of those. Yeah, I would say.
Was he a very religious person?
Was Handel very religious? I would, from my perspective, I'm not sure he was a pious person. I think that he was spiritual, but I'm not sure he was real devout. That's just my perspective. I probably shouldn't make that kind of judgment. But, I mean, clearly he understood the nature of the text. As a matter of fact, if I recall this right, he said about the Messiah that somebody said about it being so entertaining. It was incredibly entertaining to listen to. And he said, if entertainment is all that my piece that the Messiah did, then I would be greatly disappointed. So he understood the weightiness of the message. And so, yes, so I think he was religious. Did he attend church every Sunday? I don't know about that. I don't see him as a person with the kind of pious, kind of noble kind of motivation as Bach. No. But
Did it resonate beyond the aristocracy in England at the time?
Absolutely.
Did it
Well,
get down to the common people?
I think so, because I think there were opportunities for, I mean, in the big concert hall, it's the aristocracy and the people who had money to see concerts. There's no doubt about that. But I do think that there were concerts in Dublin. I mean, that particular performance was not just for aristocracy. Anybody could come. It was quite affordable. And so there were many opportunities in his time for folks that were not well-to-do to experience the performance. So, yeah. Anybody else?
Are there any contemporary composers today that stand up to Handel that you know?
Yes. But stylistically, in the way that composition is viewed and done, it's kind of like comparing apples and oranges in some ways. I mean, there are fabulous 20th century composers whose works are done in very, very frequently, I mean, John Rutter, for instance. If there's a large composer contemporary that I've done almost as much as Handel in terms of the large works are concerned, as a 20th century composer, it would be Rutter. Rutter's music is very accessible. It's very exciting to listen to. He has an incredible gift for putting sounds together, his sensibility in terms of his instrumental accompaniment and how he manages rhythmic and melodic melody. I mean, that guy can write a melody. I mean, it's just unbelievable. So yeah, but in a sort of different era. Yeah. Good. Anybody else?
In church on Sunday morning, you invite the congregation up.
Say again?
In church on Sunday morning, you invite the congregation up to participate.
You're talking about at the concert?
Yeah, and when we get up and come to sing with the choir, they have with them.
At our concert performances, there won't be an invitation for the.
No, on Sunday morning when we used to do that.
Oh, you mean the Church of the Brethren?
Church of Brethren.
We do that at Easter time,
Yeah.
not at Christmas.
My sister-in-law and I did that one year
Oh, you came up at Easter and sang?
and sang with you all.
Okay.
And after having listened to you explain all that you've explained about the writing and the intricacies of the music, I truly have a greater appreciation for the music and
Well,
what goes into it.
it's every time I hear the pieces performed by a choir there's something new to hear, something new to experience. And it seems like the more you kind of understand where Handel's coming from and what he wants to do in terms of trying to move the text forward. And I'm a text guy. I mean, I love to look and explore how the choir can make the text of a piece come alive. It's just very exciting to see the kinds of things he's done. So I hope that you'll have a chance to come. Now, I do have, if you'd like one, these are posters and tickets, not